Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to those of you who have joined us already. I see that we have about 20 participants so far that has joined us. Welcome to this third webinar in our series. Just before we start, some general tips. Make sure that your audio settings are correct, that you haven't got all your other browsers on, because, I mean, bandwidth tends to be a bit of an issue, especially now, still during very much COVID times where everything is done online. There's a chat box to your right-hand side, so you are more than welcome to chat away. Hi, good evening. I just want to double check. Can you hear me? We seem to have a little bit of a lag on our sound. Can you hear me? All right, there we go. Okay, so it's much better. Okay, so I think I'm going to keep my face off the camera. Maybe that was part of the problem, so apologies for that. So welcome again to all of you that has joined so far. This is the third one that we have in our series, and we chose a very specific topic for a very specific reason, and we call it "It's Not About Corona, It's About You." I mean, so many of the webinars that we have attended lately is all about Corona, and it's telling you what you're supposed to do because of Corona, and we felt it's time for a little bit of a shift, and it also fits in very nicely with the third of our leadership traits that forms part of our Platform for Connected Leadership framework. Tonight, I'm very excited to also introduce and announce that we're going to call in a guest for the evening that's going to be part of the webinar, which is Nadine Rix. She's a qualified CA all the way down from South Africa, but she has also done tremendous work in the fields of leadership, individual and team leadership, and then specific successes in terms of resilience, individual resilience, and then also organizational resilience. And as always, those of you who have joined us before, no stranger by now, Dr. Wada, who's our chairman, and also very, very well au fait in the field of leadership and various disciplines, absolute leader in terms of high reliability organizations. So those two individuals would primarily spend time talking to you tonight. I'll be your moderator, so you're not going to hear too much from me. Just as a matter of interest, I was wondering if we could run a quick poll. Those of you who have joined so far, I see we've got about 25 attendees. If you could maybe just quickly tell me this is your first or second webinar, or you haven't done any. So there's 3 questions. Have you attended any of our previous webinars? That's in other words, excluding tonight's. If you haven't attended any, then just say no. If you have, then say yes if it's 1, or yes if it's 2. Can I have the poll, please? All right, wow, okay, that's great. So far we've got quite a lot of newcomers. Okay, so to make it a little bit easier for the newcomers, and maybe just as a reminder for those of you who are joining us again, where exactly does PCL fit in? What is it that we do? And what is it if we say it's the third in the series? What are we referring to? So PCL stands for Platform for Connected Leadership. We're a registered company here in Dubai, obviously specializing in leadership and executive development in the region. Now that everything has gone online, we also do this on a global scale. And our success really came from an article that was published quite some time ago in Harvard Business Review, which was co-authored by myself and Dr. Wada, the other gentleman on camera. And this article basically explains our leadership thinking in terms of development. In the article, we focus on 4 key leadership traits, which is thinking, learning, acting, and inspiring. So the first 2 webinars dealt with think and learn. You can get the links of those from our YouTube channel. Otherwise, just send us a request and we'll send it straight to you. There you can see the article popping up. You're welcome to download that article. And tonight we're looking at the third of those traits. Now you'll also see that I talked there about a new article up for publication. That's going to be an article that focuses on resilience, both individual resilience, the area that Nadine will focus on tonight for tonight's webinar, as well as organizational resilience or high reliability organizations, which is the component that Dr. Wada will focus on. So we'll share both of those with you. And that sort of then contextualizes the rationale behind tonight's topic. Now, this is a very creative and colorful picture of our framework, and just to prevent any confusion, yes, it is indeed the solar system that you are looking at. And this is the representation of our framework that you can find on our website. So there you see at the top there, think to change. That was the first leadership trait. The second one, learn to excel. The third one here, this is where we are tonight, act to achieve, and then still to come towards the end of next month, inspire for greatness. And then very importantly, as those are the traits, you see these circles going around the sun. I have lead self, lead team, lead organization, lead society, and lead the world. So that's the levels of progression in terms of leadership development. And for that, we focus on the elements of reflection, building relationships, disruption, which is very much organizational at the moment, care, which is all about society leadership, and share, which is about world leadership. A little bit of a larger picture there for you. That's where number 3 fits in. So very briefly, and I think the last slide from my side, an introduction to Nadine. Nadine, welcome. This is your first time that you're joining us. Hopefully there will be more. Nadine, as you can see, from South Africa, chartered accountant with more than 20 years experience, of which 15 years was spent living and working in West Africa. She's a mother of 2 and loves working with business to enhance performance through individual development. And after finishing her articles at PwC, she headed up the risk management function of a major, actually a huge, one of the largest telecommunication companies in Nigeria, where she won awards for team excellence and culture. So she's a lifelong learner and loves doing short courses or learning new crafts. So I think it's very important, to make the point that even though she's qualified as a chartered accountant, really her work that we want to display here tonight is the ability to understand individual and team dynamics within an organizational context. Nadine, warm welcome to you. And then, of course, Dr. Wada, my friend, our friend, chairman to our organization, Platform for Connected Leadership. But other than that, he's born and based in Dubai, as you can probably guess by the attire, here in the UAE. He graduated, however, from the University of Wales College Cardiff, in the School of Engineering, with a bachelor's in environmental engineering, which he successfully completed with honors. So Dr. Wada is considered one of the global authorities on governance and leadership and high reliability organizations, something that he's going to tell us more about tonight. He is currently the Senior Director for Sustainability, Operational and Business Excellence for the ENARC Group in Dubai, massive, large petroleum organization in the UAE. And he oversees the sustainability, CSR, corporate social responsibility, energy and resource management, as well as reporting on business and operational excellence and innovation as well as process improvement. So a mouthful, suffice just to say that he's very well experienced in organizational dynamics when it comes to high reliability. So henceforth, what we're bringing you is we're bringing you these two speakers. Nadine will focus on individual resilience, which will then be a tie over, as explained in an article, into organizational resilience. And with that, I believe I can now hand over to Nadine. Nadine, it's yours.
Right. Evening, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I feel really honored to be part of this session. So I think what I'd like to do as we go through the slides, before we get the session started, is to just get an idea of, everybody attributes resilience to something else. So I've got three options on the screen. Marina, if you can maybe help me out with the poll on this one. And I'm going to ask you to just kind of indicate for me, which one do you prefer? So do you think that resilience is something that you are born with? Do you think it means that you are mentally strong? Or is resilience being able to control your emotions? So whichever one you choose in your environment, in your experience, which is the attribute that you would say, well, this is resilient? All right, so I see some answers coming through. This is quite exciting. It's my first time using polls. Wow, okay, so I think there's about half the audience thinking it's being mentally strong, about 11% saying it's something that we are born with, and about 30% saying it's the ability to control our emotions. I like the fact that majority of you are saying it's being mentally strong. Yes, I think a large component of resilience is being mentally strong. But as we go through the session tonight, we'll look a bit at what is the relationship between being able to control your emotions and resilience. And then, of course, the age-old debate of nature versus nurture. So thank you very much for that poll. We've got all the answers in now with quite strongly, 65% of people saying it's B, the ability to be mentally strong. So if we look at the definition of resilience, it's the capacity to bounce back. I heard somebody say the other day, it's more the ability to crawl forward from life's pitfalls. It's that thing inside us that makes us get up and face adversity and move through it. And it's been very much in the news and on the internet, there's so much research on it. But it's essentially that balance of getting up in the morning and going strong and moving on through adversity. So that's our own individual capacity to do so. Coming back to the nature versus nurture debate, I do think a high level of people, say that it's something that you're born with. I see it in my own kids. As Stein rightfully said, I'm a mother of two. And I can see the different reactions of my son and my daughter in this time of COVID, where, when the schools close and then they open up, they handle it very differently. So I do think there is some truth to it being something that you are born with, but I do think it's something that you can develop. There's a lot of research that shows us how it can be developed. But for me, there is no definitive answer. At the end of the day, whether you're born with it or not, in my mind, unless you have a deep desire to develop it, so unless there is a deep need within you to build that resilience, there'll be no change. No real sustainable change or development can ever take place in a space unless there is a desire for it, whether it's personal or organizational resilience. So for the purposes of this discussion, I've broadly categorized 6 domains in which we can kind of measure resilience, but more importantly, the areas in which we can look to develop our own resilience. So the first one speaks of vision. I'm not very, long-term goal orientated. I've learned very early on in my life, that it's the short term and the short successes that need to be celebrated and, work towards. I heard somebody say the other day, if somebody asked you 5 years ago, where would you be in 5 years? None of us would be able to say this would be the reality. So I do think it's important to set short goals, but more important than anything, I believe it's very important to find your purpose. Goals and these things are helpful, but if we end up spending time doing something that's not purpose-driven and meaningful, that's when the unhappiness creeps in. And I think especially in times of adversity, when there are so many things counting against us, if you're not filling your life with meaningful things and things that have purpose, it becomes increasingly difficult to achieve anything. So it's through engaging activities that lead to the fulfillment of this purpose that can really help us through times of adversity. And it's oftentimes in these times that people actually find their purpose. So use this time and really uncover what is it that makes you, what gives meaning to your life. The next thing I think is that's very important is our health. We've seen the statistic from the World Health Organization on the impact of our mental health during this time. We've seen it with our staff members. So I think it's very important not to underestimate the effect that this is having on people. So good night's sleep, making healthy choices, eating healthy. I know for myself, if I've not had a good night's sleep, I know I'm not going to be very productive the next day. So on days like that, I take my foot off the accelerator, I give myself a break. I know I'm not going to achieve 100% of what I set out to do, and that's okay. If your body tells you to take a break, take it. You'll need the energy later on. So health is really, really important. The next element we then have is composure. So composure, this is in the article where I speak of that sense of control. It deals with our ability to regulate our emotions. So when we looked at the poll that, being mentally astute, emotionally astute and emotionally in charge of what's going on around us. As a female, I have to say I struggle with this at times. I have a tendency to have very high highs and very low lows. Sometimes people appreciate that because they know exactly where they stand with you. But at the end of the day, I think leading self is critical. I know I have a weakness when it comes to anger management. I sometimes lose my temper a bit quickly, but I have found that if I own it and I share that with people, especially on days when I haven't had enough sleep and my fuse is a bit shorter, leading myself through that, making my vulnerability known, not to make it the responsibility of others to carry that burden, but I kind of am more aware of it then, so I work harder at maintaining composure. So, I do find if we're upfront with these things, it helps me personally. I share it with my household, I share it with my kids, and that helps me to maintain composure in the times when I really need to. The next section we then look at, and I've combined two elements together, which is tenacity and problem solving. Tenacity for me is very much that survivor mentality, that seeing that silver lining at the end of the day. And I'd like to share a story, if you'll allow me. As Stein said, I went to Nigeria when I was 27 years old. I was a newly qualified CA. The world was my oyster. I was in love. My fiance had already been there for a year and a half. And, I went to take up this great position very high up in a company. I thought this is fantastic. So I really was at the top of my game. And I've always seen myself as someone that was quite strong. I didn't have the easiest childhood and the easiest upbringing. So I always thought, I've got a bit of strength in me. And I found myself in 3 months' time going into a deep depression because I don't know how many of you know West Africa very well, but they have a rainy season, which typically, it starts on a Friday afternoon and it ends on a Monday morning just so that we can all go back to work. But for that weekend, the water level rises within half an hour to such an extent that you can't leave the house. So I stayed in a small apartment for most weekends. And it was about the 6th Sunday in a row that I'd woken up, opened the curtains, I saw the rain, closed the curtains and made myself ready for a day in bed crying. I missed my mom terribly. I'd moved straight from home to Nigeria. I missed my friends. Being in risk and forensics in Nigeria is not the most popular job. It's not the most easy job. I didn't have any friends. I really, really, really hated just kind of everything. It was really, really tough. And my fiance then walked into the room and he started taking our suitcases down from the cupboard and he started packing all our clothes in this. And I was kind of like not really interested in what he was doing. I just wanted to sleep through the day. And he said to me, he can't take this anymore. He can't stand seeing me, cry all the time and being miserable. And, this was not the plan. And we're going back to South Africa. So I said to him, okay, I'm in, let's go home. I don't want to do this anymore. And then he started telling me about how different our lives are going to be because, I have a very, very, high up job, so quite revered. If I move back to South Africa, that probably won't be the case. He will most likely struggle to find a job because at that point in time, his company wasn't based in South Africa. We spoke about not being able to travel. Nigeria is 6 hours away from most European countries and from the UK, and it's quite expensive with the rand being what it is to travel. And I said to him, no, we can still travel. We can go back to South Africa and we can still travel and do all those things. And he said, no, we can't. As expatriates, as some of you might know, they give you quite significant benefits to compensate for the hardship that you go through. And eventually I said to him, no, I want to do all those things. And he said to me, okay. He said, you've got the day, take the day and figure out what you want. But if you decide to stay, I don't want to see you cry about this again. This is it. And he left the room and I was so angry at him, but I knew deep down inside he was right. And I decided to stay. And looking back, it changed my life. I'm forever grateful that I made that decision. But the funny thing is once I changed my mindset to seeing this as an opportunity, everything changed. My circumstances didn't change. I was still exactly in the same position, but everything became an opportunity for learning and an opportunity for growth. And I am forever grateful for that. But I also realized that with this pandemic, this is not a choice. We weren't given a choice for this. Things are changing around us that we have no control over, and we can't just say, I want to go back home. This is what it is. But I do think that ability that we can act and we can make that choice to say, yes, this is happening. I can sit back down and cry about it, or I can actually view this as a learning opportunity. And in all the times I've faced adversity in my life, it's always been a growing opportunity and a learning opportunity. I'm not too sure whether I'll be alive to see what humanity learns from this pandemic, because I have to believe that something good is going to come from this. We've already seen how people reach out to each other and connect with each other. So I have to believe that this is a massive learning for all of us. And I hope that my kids can reap the benefit of that. And that's the kind of thing where short-term goals in the day, short-term things, living my purpose makes me think that, there's going to be good in this. And I think that's also where the problem solving and the reasoning and the resourcefulness comes from. It speaks to our ability to do scenario planning. It's looking at the worst that can happen and the best that can happen and finding a plan to navigate between those two things without too much disruption. There's this storm going on around us. So we can either, sit in the storm and wait for it to calm down, or we can actually start building a raft. We can do something about it. So the last bit talks then about, how we can do this, and that speaks about collaboration. This is building strong social networks, strong connections, really being vulnerable with each other, because as resilient as we are, I think all of us have that boundary where enough is enough. I can't anymore. And that's where these networks become critical. I know in my workplace, we started a parenting network, literally just for parents to share, so specifically for parents who have to homeschool, because in South Africa, the schools have closed. They've been closed since March. They open up a little bit and now they're closed again. So a lot of people actually have their children at home all the time, and they're struggling to manage work with the kids, with schooling and all these things. So we started a network where we literally speak every second week with each other, and we share ideas, we share tips, and sometimes we just share crying and being sad and vulnerable, and we're tired, but I always leave there feeling refreshed. I feel like I'm not alone, and I feel like I can do it. So there's tremendous growth that can come from that as well, in developing our own, kind of strength and resilience. So on the last one, as we look at this, there's this African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think especially in these times, it's so critical, to develop our own resilience, but to also walk this road together, albeit in our communities, or with our organizations. I really think something great can come from this, even though we don't feel like it every day. So that's just a bit on personal resilience. And I think it ties very nicely with what Dr. Wada is going to talk about, how we can use this then in organizations and the importance of that with organizations. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you could learn a little bit from that. Stijn, over to you.
That they take from that. I see that we've had quite a lot of comments coming in on the chat box as well, just to reassure people that we will address the questions at the end. Some questions for Nadine, and then also just Yusuf ending off saying it's so true, Nadine, teamwork is dream work. The reason why I'm just quickly coming in again in terms of the framework is Nadine, as you could hear from the story that she was sharing with us, is very much a function of self-reflection. So there, where she found herself in troubled times, what is it that she did to kind of get over that? And also how she then applied that in terms of leading teams. So that very much addresses the first two levels of leadership progress. And also very nicely fit into the leadership trait of ACT, in the sense that she didn't just sit there and did nothing about it, but she actually moved that into action. I have also in the chat box, I referred to the article, one of the questions that I received for Nadine. Of course, the article contains a little bit more detail. We'll share the article with you again. The article that she has done on resilience thus far was a great success with BDO Global. As a matter of fact, it's an article that contains a framework for individual and organizational resilience, and already is used and has application on a global scale. So thank you very much for that. Now I'm going to hand you over to Dr. Wada, and just in line with the leadership progression, as I explained in the beginning, we have leading self, then team, and then lead organization. So considering what Nadine has shared with us in terms of individual resilience, I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Wada, who will tell us more about organization or high reliability organizations. Thank you, Doctor.
Nadine, thank you, Professor Stijn. Assalamu alaikum, and good evening, whatever, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. So Nadine, and again, we go back about managing self in the framework, the PCL framework that Stijn spoke about at the beginning. And right now, when people ask me, what are organizations and who are organizations? So organizations themselves, some commentators and researchers have said, well, organizations themselves have in themselves a personality, and it probably is the case because organizations are actually made up of a lot of people. So I don't think you can have really a resilient organization without having individuals who are resilient within the organization. But as Nadine explained, that it is the sort of the conditions that organizations go through that really determine for us, are they resilient and are they not? I mean, I can read out to you a sort of a known definition, with regards to what is the sort of the textbook definition of a high reliability organization. But that would probably be something like high reliability organizations have a migratory decision-making process or processes that allow those who are closer to an incident to react to prevent escalation or otherwise. So the empowerment, what we call the empowerment within the hierarchy. And to those who would be better informed or more knowledgeable at the time, basically the leadership model within these organizations would have to be highly empowering, because it actually has that agility to move between the structures of the organization. However, high reliability organizations also, under normal conditions, would also need to be highly engaged and would have an appreciation of the risks and the challenges faced within the day-to-day operations of the organization. So what we call sometimes in this area the chronic unease. So leaders within that organizations have always got a chronic unease. They're always sort of ready to kind of react to what's gonna happen. But those organizations also are those who have very, very effective kind of systems and processes. and obviously have very competent leaders. And when we talk about competency, obviously, we talk to a lot of people about, what is a competent leader. Many organizations, for example, from my experience, they had, very good sort of technical people, very good engineers, very good operations guys, very good, and obviously with time, they grow within the organization. Their loyalty must be rewarded. Their, position must grow with the organization. Their decision making becomes, grows with time. And what ends up happening is that you put people into those positions who have been, as I said, very loyal, very technically competent in the organization, but not necessarily very good leaders, because they might not have the right kind of leadership skills to manage now a bigger portfolio, a more complex portfolio. And because of the tight coupling of systems within organizations, you must understand that one part of the system changes, it has a big impact on another part of the system. And there's also various different other attributes of high reliability organizations. So that's when we talk about high reliability organizations, we talk about organizations which have that kind of resilience. So we can't really consider high reliability organizations and resilience really separated from each other, although I'll come to the basic differences between them. So, as I said, they have a very good, kind of migratory decision-making processes in place. They're able to react and to prevent really incidents and escalations and things from happening actually in the first place, through this empowerment within the hierarchy. So people are empowered within the organization, so people feel that empowerment. And I think, just going back to what Nadine said about her personal experience, is that once she sort of understood or took stock of how the changes in her life were going to come about, and she was very, very unhappy, and it was, obviously a very unpleasant experience to be under that kind of stress and that experience. But then once she sort of rationalized it to herself, she was able to be effectively self-empowered to basically deal with these things. And we find this with a lot of leaders, especially during times when there is a lot of change within an organization. Then, I don't know, this screen keeps on changing. Just 1 second, please. Right. So we need to have a very highly empowered leadership model to have an organization. So when we say highly empowered leadership, I mean, you can have the best kind of processes, systems in place within an organization, but at the end of the day, it's the individuals, these leaders within the organization, who need to have that kind of sense of empowerment to be able to take decisions quite quickly and quite confidently, because any decision that we make within an organization can have repercussions. But under normal conditions, they need to be highly engaged with the risks and the challenges faced. So, as I said, this goes back to this whole concept of the chronic unease and people within those organizations. So it's not that you become a pessimist or you become a very negative-looking person. No, but you are very alert, and you're very aware of what's sort of going on. So in the COVID times, although a lot of places in the world there is now easing of lockdowns, and obviously people are able to go out and people are able to go back to normal kind of activities, going to restaurants, going out, and but people are still told to really sort of be sort of alert and be and take care of themselves and sort of not forget about the risk. So you have to always have in the back of your mind that you have to be careful. You have to keep your hands clean. You have to wear a mask and so on and so forth. So the greatest challenge organizations really have to becoming HROs are, I think, really three key changes. The first one is that there is really too much resistance from people. The mindset change management is always very, very difficult. it's very difficult for two reasons. One, because managers, I mean, you get two types of people. Those are the people who say, well, we've been doing this for so many years and it's worked for so many years, so we just continue. The safest thing to do is to continue doing the same thing and then hope and hope that everything gets better. But what they need to appreciate is that times are changing, right? So you have new challenges which are coming up, and there's new risks, there's new emerging problems and challenges, and therefore, like Albert Einstein said, that it is madness to think that I can do the same thing and expect any different kind of results to come from that action. So the mindset change is always very important. I currently have the privilege of governing the program governance and oversight committee I chair, and our organization is going through a SAP sort of digital transformation. One of the main things that I do in the program governance is actually look at the OCM, the organization change management, and what they're trying to do in order to change people's mindset into this new future reality of a digitized kind of organization, where now people are not keeping information with them on Excel sheets or on paper and books and stuff like that. And everything's in the system, and there is a one source of reality to everything, and it's going to be a massive change, and people are starting to understand the kind of impact that's going to happen. Then the systems and processes are too difficult to change, again, because the people who designed and put these systems in place, they find it very, very hard to change these systems, because these systems were based on a particular source of thinking. And unless you have a sort of a real change management program where you're saying, okay, well, look, these processes are in place, but we need to come up with new processes. And going back to what I was talking about the SAP transformation, that's one of the reasons why there is a lot of change, because actually you're changing the processes, you're changing the scripts, and you're changing the user interface with the computer, with the systems within the information technology systems in the company. Yet at the same time, if you don't change the mindsets, people get very, very frustrated, because then you have to suddenly learn how to use a new thing. It's like when I get very frustrated that I get a new type of phone, and then I don't know how to use it, because I haven't got the time, obviously, to read the whole manual, and I'm not going to read the whole manual. But then I try to try and error, and of course I get frustrated because it's a new software that I'm using, a new system that I'm using. And then I get even more frustrated when my 5-year-old child is able to choose the phone even much more proficiently than I can, and then I feel really I really start feeling old. But systems and processes are usually also very, very difficult to change, and they need to be changed extremely carefully. The other thing that doesn't change is that radical change also requires very fundamental thinking. And if you want to change an organization into an HRO, into a high reliability organization, you have to really go back to the root. Now, I'll explain that a bit more in the following slides. So let's talk about some of the challenges quickly, that we're having today, and what's going to happen, because people are talking about the post-COVID world. So have we started? I don't know if we've started the road to recovery, maybe to economic recovery, but we still don't have a vaccine. We still don't have one medicine that we can use. There's the doctors now, with the experience that they're getting in, because they're sharing information across borders about how they're treating various cases, they're able to manage some of the cases. Yet again, sadly enough, we are still losing thousands of people to this virus. So there's really still massive uncertainty, that we have to deal with. So management and organizations have this big challenge, because the massive uncertainty still remains. The lockdown period is also uncertain in terms of globally. So we have now, and when I say lockdown, I don't mean lockdown in the sense that actually people are still trapped or stuck at home. I'm talking about a lockdown in terms of people able to sort of mobilize and move from one country to another, because not all people can move around. Not all countries are accepting people to go from one place to another. Some countries are imposing a 2-week quarantine, self-quarantine when you arrive. Some countries, doing testing. Some countries are just not allowing anyone to come, etc. So we're still not back to any kind of normality. The re-emergence also, the WHO keeps on saying, I think their Director General's favorite statement is the worst is yet to come, and that really worries a lot of people, and I find it very worrying when he keeps on saying that, oh, the worst is yet to come. Is there going to be a second wave? Is there going to be a third wave, etc. of this virus? Well, we yet to see, but let us pray that we don't see any second or third waves of this, and that this virus is put under control at some point in the very near future. But again, there's a huge medical and economic uncertainty, and this is causing a lot of problems. I've already talked about the medical uncertainty about the disease and how to deal with this virus, and then the economic uncertainty also in terms of recovery. So companies who are operating and may feel like, sort of, well, I better liquidate now my assets and get out whilst or things will get even worse economically, or so, and also in terms of various different types of investments. I can tell you from the oil and gas sector, that uncertainty is being definitely translated into a very erratic oil price, moving anywhere below $10 right through to about $55-60 coming back. Now it's hovering around about the $40-45 mark, but it's causing that is really a very good indicator of the sort of the economic uncertainty. Although in the last 5 years there's been a little bit more of a decoupling between energy or oil price and GDP growth. But right now, I don't think you can use any indicators on and compare any previous quarters to this year. And then I call it the rebound to the new abnormal, because we say, well, what is the new normal? The new normal is going to be abnormal when we compare it to the previous normal. So these kind of challenges are there. So how are you going to basically manage organizations and the leaders within those organizations, the different departments, in terms of the expectations that you need to set in terms of, for example, financial performance or operational performance or otherwise, because you don't know what is the new normal. So, for example, if you go and ask someone who's managing for example an airline, it'd be very, very difficult for them to say in their boards, telling the CEO of that company, okay, we want you to do X, Y, and Z. I mean, he can say, well, you want to do this, I want to do this, but God knows what we can do in the next 6 months. So these are really massive challenges for leaders. So the other kind of challenges that I think is therefore looking at, so how do we start planning the next phase? How do we expect leaders to start planning the next phase? Because it's not always easy. But this is really, in my view, very much the key success factor, because regardless of what's going to happen next, if you plan for it, you probably have a greater chance of success. And in order to do this, many organizations would need to run through certain scenarios. So, and in high reliability organizations and I guess resilient organizations, they have to look at different kind of scenarios. It says, okay, scenario A, this happens, scenario B, this happens, scenario C. So we look at scenarios, for example, is there going to be an increase in demand, for example, in oil, and therefore, expect a certain price of oil to go up. Is the demand going to be for crude, or is the demand going to be for the finished products? What kind of finished products? Because definitely at the moment, the demand for jet fuel, which is generally quite a profitable product, is well, it's not there. There's in fact, some refineries, they're operating with negative margins because there's the demand for jet fuel is still no way as much as what we have ramped up in the last 5-10 years our refineries to produce. And the readiness also to transform and restructure, because again, it goes back to the original 3 challenges that I said about, you know, organizations not wanting to change and just hoping that things will come back to normal, and we're gonna go back to our normal lives when we were much more comfortable. And so the readiness to transform is really an issue. And I go back again to what Nadine said about her readiness to transform herself, and the agility that came with that, because, you know, she came to accept the reality and just, you know, took stock of, okay, look, you know, that's the situation. I need to deal with the situation. I can sit here and go through this and be very, very unhappy about it, or I can just go through this and try to do the best that I can with what I have at the moment, and try to improve it slowly, day by day. Strategic planning obviously is part of a response team. Many organizations, and it's outside the scope maybe of this presentation or this webinar, but strategic planning team should be there as part of a response team that we have as part of the strategy team. So the strategy team generally is not the right people to run the strategy for response. It's a bit funny saying this, but it's a reality, because those people who are sitting within the strategy team, they have a sort of mindset about how strategy and how things should happen. In the response team strategy, you know, you need a different kind of set of skills. Leverage on organizational competencies. Again, as I said, you know, in our high reliability organizations, we should be able to migrate between structures, and we should then leverage on the competent people that we have in the organization who are able to do various different types of things. So in our organization during COVID, we had the chief medical officer actually came, and at one point was front and center of many of the strategies that we were putting together to manage certain situations during the lockdown, and as the lockdown started easing off. And the personal leadership, you know, is it you know, agile or and situational leadership that we need, or is it just you know, thinking leadership, or is it, you know, what kind of leadership do we need? One thing I'd just like to say here is that we talk about, and a lot of people talk about agile leadership and situational leadership, and but you know, a leader doesn't become suddenly a situational leader or an agile leader overnight just because a crisis has occurred. There's certain people who probably perform much better than others as leaders because they have that sort of agility and that ability to become situation leaders. But they didn't just suddenly become situation leaders. They probably had that experience, or had that knowledge, or had that affinity to being situational. So otherwise, to develop high reliability organizations, leaders need to be developed as situational leaders. You can't expect them just to come up and suddenly be that. So let me talk a little on the slide. It's a bit of a busy slide, I'm sorry to say, but there's a dynamic, you know, we have a dynamic leadership shift, systematic intervention, learning organization, multi-communication, and redundancy. These are the 5 characteristics which are mentioned in a lot of the literature around high reliability organizations. So when you have dynamic leadership shift, this organization is able to migrate to a structure that leverages on, as I said, the competencies of people within the organization, those who have the expertise. And the opportunity here for a lot of organizations is to leverage on the skills and knowledge and leadership skills of individuals that lead the special recovery planning and the new business transformation and restructuring. So these are not the usual suspects. Yeah? These are usually people who come out from the shadows, or come out from the dust, or whatever, you know, and suddenly start taking the lead, and then, you know, they're kind of, you know, new leaders are sort of formed or are discovered within organizations, because in times of strain and stuff like that, these people sort of appear. What we're saying is, in high reliability organizations, you know those people, you've identified those people, you've trained those people, and you've identified them, and then when something goes wrong, they're the people who sort of come out and sort of help. So you can by design, make your organization, through the structure and the people, more resilient. Systematic intervention talks about managing by exception. See here, we have managers. We always say that managers should only interfere seldom within the operational issues, and they, you know, so they delegate, you know, these responsibilities and have clear processes to do those, and they just manage. They manage the process, not only the people. So they manage the KRAs and the KPIs of these processes, and instead of just micromanaging people. So operational teams here, the opportunities to need to be sort of empowered and supported and reassured by the corporate centers, because there needs to be sort of a delegation of accountability and responsibility, and learning organization. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of literature around on learning organizations, but learning organizations is a very, very important component of high reliability organizations, because they need to have this climate of continuous training and learning. So as I was telling you, suddenly the leader is expected to become an agile leader or a situation leader. They don't suddenly become an agile or situation leader. They need to be trained and have that confidence and have that skill to be able to use that tool set. So there's huge opportunities to learn, study the impacts and the assumptions and the replanning to manage, for example, data and information. So in a lot of organizations, this COVID situation was probably a very, very good, one of the best learning opportunities. And I think Nadine mentioned stuff about, learning during COVID. Then the multi-communication. On the multi-communication side, there's several channels I use to communicate what we call safety critical information in a very timely manner. You need to be able to have those multiple communication channels, and leadership needs to be sort of factual and reassuring. I'm just gonna be wrapping up now, and I'd like to say that there's one last point, which is on redundancy, which is inbuilt redundancy and the provision of having backup systems in case of failure. And so we always say that failing to prepare is preparing to fail. So and a lot of stuff and a lot of the stuff that we've been advising various organizations with regards to how to deal with this moving forward with COVID, I think, is collaboration. So having collaboration between internal and external stakeholders is extremely important. And this creates that strength in terms of the health, in terms of the tenacity that was mentioned by Nadine, but at an organizational level. So I want to ask you now a question and move to the polls very quickly. In the past 6 months, for those who are with us here today, would you say what type of leadership style was the most successful in dealing with the pandemic, or is the best leadership style for dealing with the pandemic? Is it transformational leadership? Is it situational leadership? Or is it autocratic leadership? So if I can have the poll, please, Marina. So it's not an easy question, simple question, but not always the simple questions are the easiest questions to answer, yeah? We've got about 70, nearly 70, 80% of the audience answering. Others are still thinking about it. So we'll just give it a few more seconds. So you see, I suspect if I had said not sure, maybe some people would have abstained from answering and said, well, we're not sure really. It is a very difficult question. I don't think that there is a right or wrong answer. So sorry to disappoint you. I think in certain organizations, transformational leadership generally talks about a transformation over time. I think in the immediate managing the emergency or managing the immediate shocks of any kind of emergency, you need probably more autocratic, very quick autocratic leaders. But when we say autocratic leaders, very competent, very trained, very drilled. They've gone through the drill before, and soon after that, you need then the situational leadership, because now, immediately you're assessing that situation and you're looking at making decisions based on the information which is sort of coming in. And I think soon after that, I mean, probably within the COVID period, you probably need a mix of all kind of three types of leadership, maybe starting, but at a very sort of immediate level, because you can't have too much time to debate when people's lives are at stake. So you might have to take some autocratic decisions as the leader because you're held responsible. But then immediately you have to then start looking at this and become a situation leader. And then I think a lot of transformational leaders are going to be required in the next 6 probably to 24 months, because you need to a lot of organizations are going to have to change and transform. If they don't, I think that they will suffer. Right, thank you for that. So we've got a nearly a 50-50 split between transformational and situational. So it was like in the casino betting on red or black on the roulette, right? You got 50-50 chance. Right. So let me just talk very quickly through this. The future of high reliability thinking, in my view, is going to look at, there's going to be this need for this business model kind of transformation. However, if you look at this culture maturity model, you start by an organization being unmindful, and then or pathological culture, and then moving to a reactive culture, then becoming systematic, which is very sort of compliant and stuff like that, and then moving to a proactive and a generative culture. At that turning point, at the tipping point, the psychological safety tipping point, beyond that, I think the way that leaders lead, before becoming systematic, they need to really be pushing the organization towards compliance, towards meeting the requirements and stuff like that. Beyond that, they need to start really drawing and pulling in the rest of the organization towards a certain direction, to moving towards proactivity and being generative. You need to have definitely going to be a business model transformation in the years in the period to come with many organizations, or if they're going to survive. Reliability and resilience is going to have to be what we call a sort of a defense in depth. I mean, my friends, I'll steal this term from my cybersecurity friends. They like talking about, they don't talk to me about risks. They say, well, we talk about defense in depth, because there's an adversary, right? So this COVID was always spoken about like this virus is like attacking us. They're like attacking mankind, and we have the frontline workers, and the medical staff and everyone there, and the people with the disinfection people are like we're like at war, with this. So there's an adversary. So we say that we need to have that defense in depth. So the reliability and resilience, and I think a lot of organizations are going to have to do a lot of stuff on reliability and resilience. Then they're going to have to do stress testing scenarios, because then once you put in these systems and these so-called resilient systems, are you going to be able to test the scenarios? And the long-term sustainability of an organization is going to very much depend on this. And definitely leadership in the future, given the massive changes that are going to be sort of happening, and the challenges that we're going to be facing in the years to come, with different unclear things that are going to happen in the future, we're going to have agile and situational leaders. So the transformation that we believe is required, and I'll hand over to Stein after this. But we believe that, and this is why this webinar was the third in our series to talk about leading self, is about we need to have leaders who are developed as leader-centric. So leadership doesn't become this thing where a person gets promoted and then we say, okay, we've promoted them, so now we need to do some leadership training. No, a lot of the transformation is going to have to be leader-centric. So it's going to be really intrinsic in our mind. So everyone has a bit of leadership in them. Some people more than others. Some people are, as they say, they're born as leaders. They probably have just an affinity. I think everybody has the leadership skills, and they just need to be motivated to practice them. Agility, situational, and fast transformation leadership models are going to be the future models. There's a lot of leadership, and Stein and I in our signature program, we talk a lot about experiential and sort of reflective learning, and this comes through knowledge that we learn from out of experience, and so knowledge-based sort of focused development is very, very important, because people can then access that. Collaborative thinking, as I told you, that collaboration is extremely important, and that collaboration is cross-industry and cross-functional as well. Hybrid thinking also with respect to the classical business models, because a lot of the business models that we've been teaching or we've gone through in our MBAs and whatever universities in the years to come are really going to be going to have to really stand the test of time. And I think a lot of them are gonna, you can't really get rid of them, you can't dump them, because they hold a lot of very, very important aspects and components to them. But I think a hybrid thinking between these classical models is probably going to be something moving forward, and new models from engaged scholars and from experiential kind of knowledge-based research is going to be extremely important. So sorry that took a bit longer than we planned. I hope that was interesting for everyone, and back to you, Stijn.
Thank you, Nadine. I definitely, judging by the chat that we have received during the course of the evening, there's quite a lot of questions, quite a lot of people that want to just get some more detail on some of the aspects that was mentioned. I also like to give Nadine a chance to pull some of the concepts that we mentioned in terms of organizational resilience back in the space of individual resilience. But I am also aware of the time, and I realize that we have gone over the time. So my suggestion is I'm quickly going to ask Marina just to give us the feedback form. If you won't mind to just complete the feedback form for us. If you do have, it would have appeared on your screen now. Just click on feedback, and that'll open up the feedback form for you. We appreciate your feedback. We need your feedback to make sure that we improve every time, all the time. And then, of course, those of you who want to stay online, you're more than welcome. We have set aside another half an hour along with Dr. Wada and with Nadine. But to both speakers so far in advance, thank you very much. Very insightful and certainly great learnings from that. So if you can just complete the feedback form, we'll take just a short comfort break, a minute or two, and those of you who have questions, you can start with the questions. We will share the articles with you. Quite a bit of the questions that you posed tonight, the answers to that or more detail to that, you'll find in the article. So there's two articles. The one is specifically the framework that we base the webinar series on, talking about levels of progression from individual all the way to world, as well as the 4 leadership traits that's been identified for successful leading during the 21st century: thinking, learning, acting, and inspiring. Keep an eye out for our next webinar towards the end of next month, which will be the completion of the series, which will be the 4th one. Other than that, the chat box is open, so those of you who want to chat some questions, you are more than welcome to do so. I think, Nadine, just to get us started, if you want to, you can maybe, if you're up to it, tie in some of the concepts specifically that Dr. Wada mentioned in terms of leadership, how you see that relating to individual resilience that you mentioned earlier.
Things that really stands out for me is the role of leadership in the framework that he had, where we look at there's the dynamic leadership shift, which means that it's not up to the leaders to solve all the problems. So I did see some comments saying, so does that mean if we have resilient leaders, we have resilient organizations? Not necessarily. I do think that leaders could have a kind of like a resilience threshold where they can get so stuck into micromanaging organizations and really looking out for everything. Whereas if they stand back, maybe equip the organization to already have some things in place. In the model I speak of, having data, systems, and processes in place, so they don't have to micromanage absolutely every aspect. And then very importantly is looking into their workforce to see what strengths and skills do they exist. Maybe somebody has been doing a job for years, but they're a really creative thinker, or they're a forward thinker, or they futurist or whatever the case may be. It's really to have that ability to bring that out of people. And tying that in with a learning organization, I think leaders now more than ever need to be open to say, we don't have all the answers. They might have some of them, but I think it's critical now that we dig deep into our organizations and say, I know X, Y, Z, but I can't tell the future. We're going to get together. We're going to put a couple of plans together. We're going to have some shorter time frames to see how they work, but really open themselves up to learning. Because if they're not going to learn on a daily basis, if they're just going to forge ahead with what they believe, is tried and tested, it's worked for 20 years, that's definitely doomed to failure. So I think that ability for humility to say, I'm strong at these things, I'm not strong at those things. Can we get teams of people together and really just shift from that hierarchical thinking to untap some of the potential that are in organizations that can help them to move forward. So I think that for me is definitely where the personal resilience ties into leaders and certainly what I respect in leaders of today. I don't need the CEOs of the world to tell me that they've solved the world problems. I need them to be human, because I think at this point in time, we all want to connect with that humanity and feel like we're all in it together. I don't know how many would agree with me on that, but yeah, that's a personal experience, and that I've seen that work. I know you've also mentioned before that, if we look at the organizations that have been successful in this time of COVID, it is those that not only say that people are the most important thing or the most important asset of the organization, but those that actually put their thinking behind it. They keep on paying salaries. They keep on trying to engage with people. Because I do think if I feel like my organization is taking care of me, I will be able, or I will be willing to go that extra mile. I want to go that extra mile if I feel that I'm important to them. And I think that's where leaders can play a really critical role in this. Then I can't hear you.
You can hear me? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I just quickly want to jump in there. It's absolutely vital what you say. In the research that we have done, first and foremost, just talking about connecting with people. If you look at the platform for connected leadership, the framework that we have published in Harvard, it's all about that. And so the connection runs across all levels, but it starts with connecting with yourself. So that human element, the acknowledgement of the size of the crisis, the difficulty that people have to face, because this thing hit right home. It wasn't just a crisis that, sometimes we get it, you get back home at the end of the day and you say to your partner or your friend or your colleague, whoever, you say, it was really a tough day at work, but now I'm home, so it's okay. In this case, you actually, it hit home. So people definitely, in terms of the research that we've done, very confronted with themselves. And it speaks really to the framework. Leadership starts with self, and that's why that layer of development or stage of development is so important. Get the self-awareness, reflection that leaders have, and really, kind of just breaking down the level of authority and just being humane, to be a team, with organization, with society. We had a very interesting discussion today with one of the larger retail outlets here in Dubai that said it was interesting to see. We had a restriction at one stage that if you were over the age of 60, you weren't allowed into open spaces, supermarkets. And it was interesting to see how different organizations responded to this. Some literally had the reaction of saying, "Oh, that's too bad," and others, had the reaction of saying, "Well, then we have to get to them. We have to make a plan and get to 60-year-olds that stuck at home." And the thing is, I think what we tend to forget is, people will quite easily say, well, the one organization reacted like this, and the other organization reacted like that. It's not really the organization. It's the leaders in the organization. And in terms of the research, once again, there were two dominating reactions when COVID hit. It's different in different parts of the world. But globally, leaders either went straight for people, caring about people, or they went straight for the organization, keeping the organization alive. And in the case of leaders that went straight for the organization, those were the ones that immediately started to restructure, cut costs, cut salaries. It was all just about the bottom line and keeping enough cash in the organization to maintain the sustainability of the organization. In other words, it's all about the money, not about the people. The second reaction, contrary to that, was organizations that went straight for people. You know, let's care about people, because you are dealing with a virus, you are dealing with something that's actually killing, you know, if you do get it. So there is a kind of a life-threatening component to it. And let's care about our people. Let's find out, you know, are they healthy? Where do they live? How do they commute to the workplace? Are they exposed? What additional safety and hygiene regulation can we put in place? Not necessarily for our customers, but for our people. And out of that, the three leading results or actions that we now see in our research kind of plays towards a higher probability of successful organizations is: one, if you maintain your market share. So in other words, you might have incurred additional costs to make sure that the product is on the shelf. If you didn't follow a capitalist route by just passing that cost down to the customer, you absorb that cost. Why? Because you want to retain the market share. Why? Because you actually really want to show through societal leadership, which is level 4 on our framework, you really do care for people in this time. And the second one is focus on people. And the third one is, you know, just looking at collaboration across the entire supply chain, but really from a caring perspective. So yeah, let me start tying in to what you're saying. And then the last comment, and I may be talking too much, the last comment on that is we have to be willing, and business schools in particular, to acknowledge that the kind of leadership skills that we need for the future, we might not even know what those are at this stage. You know, so it's not a question of rehashing the existing ones. It's a question of looking really at what is it that we need for the future. What does that future fit leadership skill set look like? Sense making, tolerance of ambiguity. Those are the kind of things, and they are new in the basket of leadership competencies and skills. So I just wanted to add that. I don't know, Doc, whether you maybe want to come in with some comments from your side as well. And then at the same time, we'll also have some questions in the chat box if we can maybe attend to that.
I think you covered it quite well. Steen. We should go to the questions. So I think Yusuf has got a question here. By the way, thank you, Yusuf, for your active comment. He says, how do you find integrating resilience, humility, openness to change as a trait in leaders versus transformation of the organization culture? Sometimes this becomes clashes and bottlenecks for the organization to reinvent for better. Actually, I just want to say one thing and then ask Nadine, because that's you know, a lot of the focus on the person. But very interestingly, I'm currently helping someone in reviewing their PhD proposal, and they're doing something really interesting in the School of Business and Social Sciences and Law, and this particular research is looking at incorporating authentic leadership subsystem into the classical socio-technical systems-based framework to enhance industrial safety. So they're looking at basically the importance of authentic leadership when it comes to basically developing strong safety management systems within organizations. And it's quite interesting stuff, because, you know, when you're looking at the socio-technical systems, there are frameworks behind it. But the question is that, you know, a lot of researchers have said, well, you know, we put all these systems in place, but we still continue to have failures, and some of these failures are quite serious failures that happen. Therefore, you know, you need that authentic leadership, or you need something else that we need to consider about leadership that drives really a better and more and safer kind of organizational culture. So, I mean, what I say is that, no, definitely there needs to be a lot more research in this area that connects, you know, transformation. And I say this, one, because there is quite a bit of research out there, but the research is always backward looking and not forward looking. Today we need to forward looking research, because we need to sort of try to imagine, you know, this new post-COVID world, and then what's going to happen, you know, after COVID, and other challenges that are going to face the global economy. because even globalization was really put to the test, and it's being put to the test even till today. So I don't know, Nadine, if you have any inputs.
I love the thing what you mentioned, the authentic leadership. I watched the Simon Sinek talk the one time, and he said, people go on these authentic leadership courses and you leave now and you go, okay, well, I'm authentic. What does that mean? So I love that word because it's all encompassing in terms of, what we look for in leaders is that sense of realism. I do think, and I say, especially in the safety realm, seeing as you mentioned that example, I think it's critical to understand, organizational culture is not necessarily the same as societal culture. If you have a organization that has to be high safety compliance and you're operating in a place like a Nigeria or a Ghana, the culture is, you and I would consider something to be safe. You get into the car, you put your seatbelt on, whereas there, typically you have 20, 30 people together in a taxi, sometimes sitting on the roof. So the definition of safety is vastly different. So a lot of times I think, looking at organizational culture, I think leaders sometimes forget that it's not necessarily in line with the societal culture. And it's to understand that once you step into this organization, here are the rules. You can do whatever you want to do at home or wherever the case may be, but when you step in here, these are the rules. And that needs to be very, very clear to define that. I think bringing it back to kind of what we're looking for in leaders, and coming back to the authentic leadership is to say, when we look at safety standards and things like that, how do I make people feel safe? Like Stein was saying, you're coming into the shop. I think it's best to just ask them what would make you feel safe, because I might have a definition of what would make me feel safe. I would know what would make my children feel safe, but I don't always understand what would make my people feel safe. And that's where the real transformation takes place. It's up to us to, in these uncharted waters and in this uncertainty, not assume that our standards for safety and responsibility and taking care of each other is the same. I think we need to have those difficult conversations to say, is this enough? This is what I think is enough, but is it enough for you at home or wherever you are? And it's conversations that I don't think we've ever had to have before. We now in an environment where we work with our kids. So all of a sudden I'll be sitting on webinars and team chats and things like that with people, yet they're trying to be business-like, but then a child runs past in the background. And it's kind of as if everybody ignores it because it's weird now because we're in a work environment. But the reality is that is where we are. So are leaders doing enough to clarify those things, and really, like you were saying, stop assuming and ask. And I think it's put a whole another dimension to the kind of conversations that leaders need to have with people. Stein, if you'll allow me one example, when I was working in Nigeria, obviously I mentioned before the expatriate salary and things like that. And there's a huge discrepancy between expatriates and locals. And we see this in a lot of multinationals. And my staff, the first 3 months didn't quite know who I was. And, it became rumored that there's something going on and, I'm getting paid this amount of money and I'm staying there, blah, blah, blah. And I made a very bold decision to pull our finances, and I showed them the departmental budget. I showed them all of my benefits. I took them to the house where I stayed and I showed them everything. And I said, well, this is where I stay. This is what I earn. If in 6 months' time, you don't feel that I've added this amount of value to you, I will resign. So I put all the cards on the table. And within 6 months, we never had the discussion again. So it was a bold step that I took, but in that, I bought transparency, loyalty, all of those things, which a lot of people just tell me, no, you can't do that. I think we need to do things vastly differently from how we did them before. So yeah, I hope that makes sense to your question, Doc.
Yes, I think. But by the way, there is an interesting question here from Wim or Dr. Wim. I'm not sure, but anyway, he said academic institutions need to reevaluate their value, otherwise corporate industrialist learning will replace it. We need academic and corporate universities to work much closer together. I sometimes feel academic universities are not considering business needs. Let me tell you. This afternoon, I was interviewed by a university, a local university here in the UAE, and they were evaluating if I could teach. I think this is what they wanted, to teach an undergraduate course in HSC, and then the question that they asked me is that, have you done this kind of teaching before? I said, yeah, I did some teaching, but a lot of my teaching has been, with people who are, within the organization or working people, not so much. I didn't do undergraduate. I've done master students, but not undergraduates. And one of the people who was sort of interviewing me said, well, the regulations are things. I mean, the truth is, I wasn't really looking for a job with the university. I did this interview because a colleague of mine I work very closely with, and I have a lot of respect for him, has a lot of respect for me. He actually just recommended me to sit and talk to them to give them some ideas. And then suddenly I was put under this, being questioned on my, if I had what it took and whatever the competencies and stuff like that, which I respect because, governance is very, very important. But interestingly, me and Stain, and Stain may comment here. I'm the academic industrialist, and he's in the industrial academic in this relationship, right? Is that I don't know, Stain, if you want to shed light on that, but that brings about a certain kind of balance. In fact, I am in the process of writing an article about industrial academics and academic industrialism, because a lot of people have asked me about what I mean by these terminologies and stuff like that, and it's a balance. But the short answer to your question, Wim, is that no, definitely I could not agree with you more. And in fact, that's one of the things that me and Stain very much enjoy about our relationship. So Stain, over to you.
Thank you, Doctor. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think the thing is, to just talk about academic institutions, because I myself am involved with one here in the UAE, as you know, those of you know me better by my profile. And what Doctor is referring to here, I often say to people, it's good if you stand with your one foot in practice and the other one in academia, because you can take the theory into practice and also take the practice into the classroom. And yes, it's a good model, but the point is, and to me, it's actually a little bit of a bigger concern. I know we're diverting slightly because we're talking about academic institutions and not so much about leadership in corporate organizations where we started. But it is an important point to make that our leaders, by and large, are educated through MBAs and international business schools across the globe. And one of the things that we highlighted during our first webinar was the economic fragility that we have right now is, up to a large extent, a result of the type of internationalization strategies that we teach our CEOs when they undergo an MBA, and that is a question of scaling. Yeah. So take your product to where it is cheapest to make and sell it somewhere else in the world. So, even though, and I mean, Dr. What I always use as this example, even though my neighbor might be producing pencils, if his pencil is more expensive than what I can pay for it by having it manufactured some other part of the world, I'm rather going to get it from some other part of the world. Now, the stupidity in that model is, one, it primarily drives satisfaction with shareholder value, which is only one of the stakeholders. But if we think of the environment, the green environment, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ship something 16,000 kilometers away to arrive at my border all the way just because I can make an extra couple of pennies on it. The carbon footprint is a lot more. And what we had at the end of the day is, and we saw it now with COVID, I think it was a big wake-up call where we saw that just about everything is being manufactured in China. That's why when it happened in China and to the rest of the world, everybody went, oh, where did that come from? Well, it partially came from us creating China and us putting China in a position where they are the manufacturers of all products in the world. And that's a function of what we teach in the business school. We teach people economies of scale. So you scale in terms of production cost and you scale in terms of market. So I think that you need to kind of look at what it is that we are teaching MBA students. We had the accusation in 2007, 2008 during the economic crisis, where people also said, how is it possible that we could be in this economic crisis, the liquidity crisis, when we have so many more CEOs that was taught by so many more business schools? It's about this. I think that link is missing, and I think the models are very static in a sense. And then there's one last point I want to make, just, while I still have a bit of airtime, I see people are leaving fast and furious, is, we keep on talking about leaders as if you have a hierarchical position of authority in an organization, and we now expect, from the leaders, there's always this kind of, we're waiting for our leaders to tell us. And I think that, what our platform for connected leadership tells us is, what, you the leader, there where you are. You take someone like Satya Nadella, and I'm a big fan of, he's the CEO of Microsoft. He's at the moment, he's one of the top 5, Microsoft, one of the top 5 organizations in terms of how they're treating COVID. But you know what? He didn't need COVID to be like that. He is just like that. So in normal times, the guy's just a phenomenal leader. And if you look at his, his ethos in terms of leadership, he's not someone that leads from a hierarchical position in terms of the organizational structure. He takes most of his guidance from other people in the organization that is, that's scattered throughout the hierarchy of the organization. So I think, when it comes to something like COVID and the crisis we have right now, probably the person on the shop floor knows more what needs to be done in terms of hygiene and keeping customers safe than what the CEO does. And I say that with a lot of respect. There are exceptions, but most CEOs, and I always smile when people tell me, you ask a CEO, what's the most important thing to you, and they'll always say, our customers. And I know sometimes just wonder, when last have you engaged with customers? It's that kind of a thing. And again, I say it with a lot of respect, but we really need to flatten that structure. What we have here is we have a pandemic, and which is very complex, and complexity is a lot better served through diversity than what is served through expertise. I've always said that. So that's a couple of points I wanted to make. Sorry, Doc, on your comment on the yin and the yang that we represent in terms of industrial, academic, and the other way around. But then also just some general comments on leadership and what we would like to see during this time. Thanks.
Yes, it's fantastic. I think Dr. William came back again and said Bond University in Australia expect their MBA students to start a business or to launch a new product or service, and not write a thesis, which is very interesting. Yeah, that's a very interesting thought. In fact, you'll see many vocational programs, many of the vocational programs, like the ones I'm familiar with, like NIBOSH, or certificates through the professional engineering chartership programs, usually require you to produce something to show that you got experience or you've applied something. But even doctorates, even doctorates in the last decade have changed. I mean, the doctorate that I did was a DBA, and I had to prove to the external examiners to pass that my doctorate had an impact on industry and society as much as it had the academic rigor that was required for PhDs. So even we've already seen that transformation and change in degree courses and vocational training programs to date. So yeah, it's I think in the next 10 years you're going to see many of the programs, especially business-based programs, vocational programs, move in that direction.
Okay, people, sorry, I'm going to have to come in on this. I know Nadine and Dr. Wada, for those the participants that's still online, when we did the prep for this, they ended up talking to one another for 2.5 hours. If we don't stop them now, that might happen again. But really, thank you very much, Doc, for bringing us the insights from an organization perspective. Nadine, all the way from South Africa, wonderful to have you with us. And I definitely foresee in the future that we'll invite you again. To the participants, again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Blessings. Thank you very much.